Before we begin, since this is a BBC-owned property, I feel the need to point out that the news arm of the BBC has a continuing issue with transphobic leanings in its news coverage. You can find in a pinned comment below various videos from both myself and other YouTubers covering this issue. And while I understand that the Doctor Who creative team is not responsible for this, I will continue to point this out for as long as it remains a consistent issue. Thank you. I would say this is where the plot thickens, but I think this might be the point where the plot turns to concrete. Though maybe that's the next one. Take Two Doctor Who reviews continue, and I move forward in my rewatch of Doctor Who Flux. And I'm trying something a little different with this one. Because my opinion of the Halloween apocalypse basically reaffirmed that, yes, it was as bad as I remember, possibly even slightly worse. My rewatch of War of the Sontarans told me that the one I remembered as the good one had a lot of problems with that I'd kind of forgotten or was more forgiving of, and the stuff that was good about it doesn't quite hold up the same on a rewatch. So, knowing that I don't feel great about the remaining episodes of this, I'm coming into this deliberately trying to be as positive as I can, because otherwise this is going to be a miserable slog for you, for me, for all of us. So, did my going into Once Upon Time, the point at which I basically gave up on Flux when it first aired, rewatching that with that mindset, did it help? Yeah, actually, a bit. I'm not sure it would have helped Halloween Apocalypse, to be clear, because that one was it's just such a cramped mess. Even if I'm looking for the good, it's sharing space with so much other stuff that it's just too dang much. But this one, there's more good here than I remembered there being. I still don't really, I'm not turning around in my overall assessment of the episode. I don't think that's going to happen with any of these, if we're being honest, for the remainder of this series. But I do think that there is something to be said for knowing how the pieces fit together, more or less. Because part of the thing with watching it the very first time was that this episode in particular felt like it should have been laying the firm foundation for where we were going. Like, Halloween Apocalypse introduced nearly every friggin' plot thread and just dumped them on us. War of the Sontarans was more focused, but it was because it largely had to deal with the plot that didn't have to do with most of the rest of the Flux. And then the stuff that had to do with Flux wasn't really that much better. And this episode, when watching it for the first time, felt like what should have been like a firming up and a solidifying of what the main thrust of Flux was, and it just felt like a mess on first viewing, because I'm like, if you're trying to start solidifying what you're doing for me, it's not working. But now, having come back to it, watching it again, and having seen the whole thing, and knowing where it's going-ish, this has more good to it than I gave it credit for at the time or in my memory, if I'm being honest. What kind of good is there? Well, honestly, the dream logic and the off-putting nature of the way the sort of dream sequences are done, whether it be, the Doctor who gets the primary focus being suddenly in her own past, occupying, we find out a little bit into the episode, the fugitive Doctor's body, but also being like, wait, this isn't right, I shouldn't be here. And that sort of fading in and out of a dream understanding where this isn't how it's supposed to be, but also you kind of also know what the rules are now that you're here. That sort of way that your brain eases you into a dream state and a narrative that does not make sense, but it's going to make sense for now. And the Doctor sort of phasing in and out of that mindset of, wait a minute, and also, oh yeah, right. And it also does it very well with Dan, I think, especially with the way that the scene flows with him and Di, and they're in the daylight. Suddenly it's night, and you can tell he has like a quick second of what, and then like, okay, yeah, no, yeah, of course it's night. It reminded me, his section especially reminded me a little bit of Donna in the computer when Donna Noble was saved in the two-parter set in the library, with her talking about, wait, how did we get here? And then like the machine kind of backfilling in the jump that just happened.
You've done so much in 7 years, Donna.
Sometimes it feels more like 70. Mind you, sometimes it feels like no time at all.
It reminded me a little bit of that in a good way, not in a derivative way, but in evoking a similar overall feel that is just meant to put you off a little bit. Yaz is used largely to introduce the Weeping Angels into this, but it's pretty well done as far as that goes. I would argue that the Weeping Angels into the overall story that Flux is supposedly telling, their presence doesn't really help that story very much and probably actively distracts from it in the end. But if I take that as a given and just deal with the fact that they're here, this is a decent introduction to them. And the way she keeps seeing it in the mirror initially, and then looking back and it's gone. In addition to the stuff like the other cop in the car with her looking like the doctor and then not. And that whole dream sort of feel to those segments in general is really well done. I like anything that can properly capture that, wait a minute, wait, feeling of knowing you're in a dream, but also not fully having a complete grasp and not being 100% certain that that's what's going on. And it captures that feeling really well. And I'd kind of forgotten it had done that.
And just a quick note for the pedants in the audience. Yes, I am aware this is not actually a dream for any of them. They're back in their own timeline, but their timeline is messed up. But dream-like is the feel that it goes for. That's what I'm talking about. Don't at me.
Vinder's bits with sort of going through his own backstory are a little bit weaker in terms of capturing that feel, but it's also genuinely filling in backfill for him that we don't know because we don't really know this guy yet. And since it has to strike the balance of giving us more actual information on him, yeah, it was probably the right call to make. This also gives us the introduction of the Grand Serpent, who I would argue is both one more villain than we need and also still probably one of the more effective villains that is present. And I say that as someone who doesn't think Swarm Major are terrible. They just don't fully work. The Grand Serpent, like right from his first introduction, when you first see him, I mean, just the fact that his name's the Grand Serpent, honestly. But just when you're in the room with him and he's just talking calmly and, Vinder's going to be, watching him, be his bodyguard or what have you. And Vinder just says something offhandedly and the Grand Serpent just goes silent, just turns and looks at him. And just that quiet sense of like, oh, geez, I don't even know why that was the wrong thing to say, but holy crap, am I in trouble now? He captures that feeling really, really well. And I remember from scenes later in Flux, like, he's good for this. In terms of the overall narrative, again, like a lot of stuff going on in Flux, I don't know why he's here. Well, let me back up. I get why he's here in Vinder's backstory. He's actually kind of core to it. I don't remember why he shows up later. And like the very nature of the Flux kind of gets thrown off a little bit in this because when it was depicted before, it really did seem like it was just flat out destroying stuff. But we open with Belle. And Belle is, she's sort of moving. Yeah, a lot of planets destroyed, but a lot of them are also still there. Like destroyed buildings, but like, wait, why is anything left? Wasn't the nature of this thing like completely wipe out everything? And I guess like it still can kind of work, but it's one of the many things that doesn't get explained particularly well because even the nature of what the Flux is and exactly what it does on impact is never made completely clear. So it struck me weird at the time, and also now in the rewatch, strikes me as odd that there is as much left as there is at all. And also, the introduction of Belle, it jumps in right on her, and I don't know why they play so coy with the fact that she's connected to Vinder, because they don't reveal that until towards the back end of the episode. I don't know why that's held back. Because first of all, as a twist, quote unquote, it holds no real relevance and no real meaning. But at the same time, holding back that information and making it unclear how she connects to what else is going on makes it harder to latch onto her story and to care because you're like, I don't know this person and I don't know how they connect to this. I don't know why you're showing me this. And it's really hard to do that and get the audience to invest. But on a rewatch, that's not as much of a problem because I know what her connection is. So I was able to appreciate her actual story in and of itself a little bit more. And it's not too bad. I still think it is actually a problem that they don't reveal her connection to Vinder much sooner than they did. I think it's nothing but a detriment to the narrative to hold that back for as long as they do in this episode. But knowing that does help quite a bit. So we get a little bit more sort of info about Passenger, sort of, but we also don't know entirely what's going on with that. We get the reintroduction of Tek Tayoun, who is not yet identified as such, but will be. And this idea that the flux was caused on purpose because of the Doctor. And there's some stuff that's said about Swarm du Jour that I really couldn't fully parse it. I couldn't tell if Tek Tayoun was implying that them getting loose was part of the flux or like was necessary for the flux to happen, or they were taking advantage of the flux. Like, it's mentioned, it's brought up, but like it's made very unclear. Like, there are so many antagonistic forces in this, and how they connect to each other or to the flux is very thin and sometimes non-existent. It's made all the weirder that this thing was called flux. Like, yes, a lot of stuff everything's kicked off by that event, but not everything ties into it really. So it's weird. And another thing from Bell's story is we get, and this comes up in Dan's story as well, like we get these sort of, it's not a good effect. It actually reminds me a lot of the kind of effects that were done in the third Doctor's era. But these sort of blue little mite things that like wipe things out. And it said at one point that they're wiping out anomalies. I'm about to say something that's going to be really weird for anyone who knows this channel and knows things that I've said, including not too long ago. Why aren't they just the Reapers then? Now, understand, I don't like the Reapers. I don't really like the episode Father's Day all that much in the first place. And I really don't like the Reapers. I put them on my list of worst one-off villains. But if you're going to have something that is effectively doing the exact same thing, why not just make use of the thing that already exists? Instead of it might have been budgetary. I imagine this is probably cheaper to render than trying to update the look of the Reapers to modern expectations. But like it's very strange to me because it's doing the literal exact same thing as described. So just use the thing that's already established. I mean, my actual argument would be maybe don't bother with this stuff at all. It doesn't actually seem to matter or do much or impact anything. It's just there. It's another thing that's just there. But like, if you're going to have it, like, reuse stuff, recycle. It's good for the environment. I do appreciate that we get some more Jo Martin as the fugitive Doctor. Not because she gets a ton to do, but just because I really like her as the Doctor. So any additional time we get with her, I appreciate. They really severely underutilized her. Like, it's almost criminal how underused she is over the course of this. But we get a little more time with her. I appreciate that. And with the sort of flashbacky stuff that we get with her, we do get a clear connection between the Ravagers, that Swarm du Jour, and the Mori, which again, is a concept I don't like. But that still doesn't really connect them to the Flux. So again, how, why, this does still suffer from as a microcosm of a lot of the problems with the story overall. There's too many threads, they don't properly connect, and there isn't time to clarify what's here because too much stuff is taking up space. So that is what's going on with this episode, as it is going on with the whole thing. But, as I said at the beginning, there's more good here than I thought. There's some well-done tension with the Angel and Yaz. There's just a good dream-like sense to the earlier ends of it. This actually, now that we're actually getting time with Vinder, he's been plot important already, and they really should have established him before doing any of that. But now that we are getting background on him, it's well conveyed. You get a good, strong sense of his moral center as a character, about what it was he was prepared to put his neck on the line for. And it tells you a lot about him. It's not bad storytelling at all. It's a little bit like how I came to appreciate how good Dan's introduction was in Halloween Apocalypse. Like, that's a lot better handled than I was expecting based on my memory of this. I kind of feel the same about Vinder's backstory. I think the placement of when we learn it maybe isn't where it should be, but while we actually learn, and also seeing his reaction for like being this semi-dream state of being like,
don't make me relive this bit.
Again, it tells you a lot about him in an interesting, engaging way. There is good, actually quite a bit more good in this than I remembered. It's still kind of a mess. And the cliffhangers, okay, look, I don't like cliffhangers. Broadly speaking, I just don't. My preferred version of a cliffhanger is debatably not a cliffhanger at all. I don't really like and here's the sudden threat. I like a more of a grander sense. Like, here's the way I tend to put it. I don't find it particularly engaging if you have the hero dangling off a cliff at the end of an episode. I know they're not going to fall off that cliff. They're not. It's going to be dealt with in the first 20 seconds of the next episode. But you want to end an episode with them pulling themselves up off that cliff so they're no longer dangling, but then they look out and they see the army, the fortress, the castle, or whatever it is they're going to have to try and deal with, and you give a sense of the size and the scope of that problem. That's a cliffhanger-ish thing that can work for me. But this is very much the, let's just, and like, this is very Hempha's just out of nowhere. Suddenly, the angel's on the TARDIS. Like, I know the angels got established already in Yaz's thing, so it's like, it's not a complete Diabolus ex machina. They do get established. We know they're around and involved, but like, this does just happen suddenly to give us a cliffhanger. It's a thing I don't enjoy in general, and I don't like it here. But Once Upon a Time, quite a bit better than I remembered it, without still actually being good. But credit where credit's due. A lot more good in this than I remembered. So, have you rewatched this episode lately? Whatever you thought about it, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living, even if you can't help me out that way. Like, share, subscribe. Those are also of great assistance. There's links to other stuff that I do, other platforms that I'm at, merch, my books that I've written, etc., all down in the description. But don't worry too much about it. What I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. Massive thanks to my Patreon supporters, and in particular, I want to thank Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Ruth, Oliver B., Solitary Pictures, Ulrich Bogdan, Melinda Walters, Jen, Leotha Boyd, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Fernabilax the Poodle, Robin Powell, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Kasparov, Adam R.D.L. Taylor, David Hall, Shayla Gourlay, and Rosalind Bennett. Thanks for your support. You can get your name in the credits too if you feel like hearing me possibly struggle with it for several times before getting it right.